This is a very special session organized in the context of our online course on exploring the labor dimensions of climate change and labor mobility and human mobility. However, it's also a bit of a standalone session today, celebrating International Migrants Day as well, which happens to fall on the 18th of December. And also, it gives us the opportunity to present, to launch from our side the latest issue of the Forced Migration Review, looking specifically at the nexus between climate change, displacement, and the choices that people forced to move in the context of the adverse effects of climate change may have in front of them. We have quite a packed session, quite an interesting panel ahead of us. But let me take a couple of minutes before we move into the heart of the session to, first of all, introduce myself and the team, and also to set a few housekeeping rules to help us throughout the development of the session today. So my name is Michela Albertazzi. I am currently coordinating the Labor Migration Cluster at the International Training Center of the ILO. And it is in this context that the course that I just mentioned and the session today is being organized. It's a big pleasure for us to see so many names that we recognize in the list of participants joining us today, in the audience that is joining us today. But also, it's quite exciting to see many new faces, many new names. So we really hope to be able to engage in a fruitful and insightful discussion with all of you. For your information, the session today will be offered in English only. It is being recorded, and the recording will be shared afterwards through the email that you use to register in a follow-up message in the next day or so. For those of you who have been already participating in some of our sessions, you may already know we try to keep all of our events as lively and as engaging and interactive as possible. So please feel free to share your questions, share your reactions, your comments, any additions or requests for clarifications through the chat box. We can pick it up from there. We will have a dedicated moment for Q&A and for an open discussion, open debate towards the end of the session. And we'll be keeping an eye on the chat box to pick up any insights or any questions or comments from your side. At the same time, in the spirit of keeping things interactive as well, we wanted to sort of break the ice before moving into the heart of the session. We wanted to break the ice a little bit with a short poll to have a bit an insight, or let's say to hear from you a little bit about what you think are the key, let's say, the numbers that give us an idea of the scope of the phenomenon that we're going to address in the session today. So let me see if I can. Okay, you should be seeing now on your screen a pop-up window with two questions actually. Let me maybe take a few minutes to read the question to you. Over the past decade, weather-related disasters have caused approximately X number of internal displacements. And here you have some choices: 250 million, 125 million, 350, or 65 million. And you will see, you should be able to see already on the screen a bit the number or the, let's say, the answers coming in showing already the change on your screen. The second question is linked to the first, and it's the following statement. So there are over 117 million people that are displaced by conflict around the world, and approximately a certain percentage of them live in countries with high to extreme exposure to climate-related hazards. So the percentage that we're looking for, is it 25%, 50%, 75%? Or would you argue that it is impossible to say? And I see that almost half of you have participated with your responses already through the poll that you can see on your screen. I am aware of the fact that if people are sometimes joining, for example, from their mobile devices, they may find it difficult to click or to participate this way. So please feel free also, if it makes it easier on your side, to share your reactions, your responses in the chat box, and we can pick it up from there if something particularly striking comes up. I will potentially give you a couple of extra minutes to continue to respond. I see that the percentage of participants that have responded is steadily growing. And then in a minute or two, I will also close this poll so that we can see all together a bit the results to see what your impression is. And then I will let my colleague Paul Tacon, who is labor migration specialist at the International Labour Organization and who will be our moderator in the session today, I will maybe let him start us off with a few comments on the results of the poll. So as I see, somebody is still engaging with the poll, is still responding. Let me maybe review the questions quickly before we close. So the first one is, over the past decade, weather-related disasters have caused X number of internal displacement, and the options are 250, 125, 350, or 65 million. And then the second question is, there are over 117 million people displaced by conflict around the world. And out of those 117 million people, a percentage live in countries with high to extreme exposure to climate-related hazards. So we're looking for what that percentage is. Is it 25%? Is it 50%? Is it 75%? Or would you argue that it is impossible to know for sure? I see that almost two-thirds, almost three-thirds of the audience today has already responded. So I'm going to end the poll for the moment and share ideally the results on the screen. So if you could let me know whether you do see indeed the results, fantastic. And Paul, maybe I will pass the floor to you right away. First of all, thank you for being with us and thank you for accepting to moderate this session and maybe some insights on the numbers that we see on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. Thanks also for your amazing support and the support of the whole team in Turin for actually putting this together quite quickly. We usually like to take more time to prepare these things, but we did this in a bit of a with quite a quick turnaround, and I think it's really a testament to your wonderful support that there are so many people here today. I think the poll results are very interesting. I have to admit myself, I'm not sure I know the correct answers, but I think certainly there's clearly a consensus that there is a large volume of displacement that has been caused by weather-related disasters. And here we're talking internal displacement, but we can also think about whether this is going to how this relates to international movement. And I think also quite a strong sense that people are concerned that good. Well, it's always helpful to know that I actually did put the right answers. So that indeed 75% of people displaced who are displaced are living in conflicts, climate affected with high exposure to climate affected hazards. So I think this just shows again that this is very, very timely. And I'm seeing in the chat that we have participants joining from as far as Palau, from Kenya, Thailand, Lebanon, Cameroon, Haiti, Pakistan, Nepal, Angola, India. So I don't want to leave anyone out, but I think we've got a huge diversity of participation. I think that's really wonderful. I really value your engagement and commitment this close to the end of the year when there are lots of competing priorities and people are starting to go on leave. But it's really great to have you here, and it's really great to be able to wish you a very happy International Migrants Day. Um, and I think it's important to say that this isn't International Migration Day, it's International Migrants Day. Because too often I think people, we hear this everywhere in the general discussion, talk about migration without really thinking about the migrants and the people on the move at the core. We talk about perhaps waves or flows of migrants. We talk about them like the tides, really, that are being affected in a mechanical way by the gravity of the moon. But in reality, migration is about people who are making hard choices in difficult and uncertain times. And climate change is only adding to these difficulties. So that's why this issue of forced migration review has really focused on the agency of displaced people. Not just what people should, what policymakers should do for displaced people and migrants as passive recipients, but how the people themselves and their families and communities try to take control of their lives, and how we, in our all our different roles as policymakers, as NGOs, as employers and workers organizations, as UN agencies, can really support this process. And running through all the articles in this issue, we see that there is a common thread, which is the need for proactive responses, which are grounded in rights, the involvement of affected communities, and evidence. And given that rights, engagement, and better evidence are really central to ILO's DNA, we were very proud to be able to support this issue. And I would really like to take a moment to really thank our colleagues from the Prospects program who provided the financial support that made this special issue possible. Um, this discussion is really coming at a sort of an intersection of a number of different developments in the linked worlds of climate change, just transitions, and human mobility. So, in the climate world, obviously, the latest COP just ended. There is much that is left to be desired in the outcomes. We all know that. But there are some positive steps that we can see. And one of those is that the idea of just transition, the idea that we can't just address climate change without addressing social and economic impacts and the rights of the people, and especially the labor rights of the people involved, should move from what was previously a sort of dialogue session sharing practices to something more concrete. The just transition mechanism, or the Belém action mechanism, which many people in civil society, a colleague who was in Belém was telling me, were walking around with badges that just said "BAM." That's what we're hopefully that's the kind of strong impact that this mechanism will have. And there's a very strong recognition within this outcome that there is a need to involve and protect the rights of migrants and people on the move. And the midterm of review of the Global Refugee Forum was just held, and it's gathered governments and others over 3 days to reaffirm and announce new pledges, support for stronger refugee inclusion, and it also addressed climate change as a major driver of displacements. And finally, in May next year, we have the second International Migration Review Forum taking place at the UN General Assembly, which will be a really important opportunity to talk about climate as a driver of migration and pathways for people affected by climate change. So thanks again to the colleagues from Prospects for their generosity in supporting this program. Thanks to the team at Forced Migration Review, who were kind enough to reach out to us and give us this opportunity to participate in this process. And I'm really looking forward to moderating this session with a number of distinguished experts, beginning with, I'll get the names here. So we have the first intervention will be from Alice Phillip, who is the managing editor of the Forced Migration Review, followed by the lead author of one of the articles, my colleague Bea Cinco, who is a technical officer in the Prospects program of ILO. We'll then have another article author, Dr. Bishwajit Malik, who is Associate Professor of Climate Change and International Development Studies at Utrecht University. And then we'll have some experience from the ground with another colleague from the ILO, Miss Liliane Ndinda. And then we'll have hopefully some time for discussion. So without further ado, I've probably already taken too much time. I'd like to turn to Ms. Phillip from the Forced Migration Review. So this issue of the Forced Migration Review brings together a wide range of perspectives on climate change and displacement. Now, from your editorial vantage point, what stood out most in terms of how livelihoods and work are shaping people's choices to move, stay, or rebuild? And why do you think it's important to bring labour and employment more centrally into conversations that have typically focused or traditionally focused on humanitarian responses? So please, Ms. Phillips, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I am just back myself from the Global Refugee Forum in Geneva. I came back yesterday, so it was wonderful to see so many people and events focusing on climate within the sessions, and it is indeed very timely that we've been publishing this issue. Thank you to the ILO for their partnership, which helped us in this issue to think about how labour rights and livelihoods did actually fit within so many of the questions that different authors were exploring and incorporate it into the concept and the call for articles at the start. And I think that's one of the things, isn't it? With issues that are often underplayed, we need to, from the start, embed them in processes like this. And there were 265 people who sent proposals for this issue. It was the largest ever in terms of response. And I think that really encouraged us that this is a topic that people care about, that they're interested in, that they want to learn about, that they're grappling with. And on International Migrant Day, I want to echo what Paul has said about it being about people. And I thought that this issue, we wanted to look at it not from a technocratic perspective, but actually for real people facing difficult choices. What does this mean? So your question specifically, Paul, about how do livelihoods questions come throughout? Well, I know that we'll be hearing from two of the authors, so I'm not going to go over the great article from ILO colleagues and the wonderful article from Professor Malik and his co-authors, but there were a couple of others that just I picked out to highlight. I think that Mickey's going to put on the screen just a little picture for people of the issue. And I'd really love for you to go to the website and you can download it. You can read it on this nice e-reader. You can look at it just as individual articles and to just digest it, enjoy it. There are 118 pages of things devoted to these topics. And you'll see here, yeah, that's a great page for you to just stop on quickly, Mickey. Of the range of articles. 5 different continents are represented amongst the authors, and it was wonderful to have such a wide range of perspectives. I was struck as I was editing, as a non-expert, but someone who takes a great interest in each of the topics that we spend time on, by how much labour and livelihoods issues were drivers and solutions, and how different authors touched on them in both settings. So the article by Kirill Sharapov, based in Mongolia, was very interesting because it looked at how diminishing rural livelihoods was such a driver of climate migration, but how at the same time, lack of livelihoods opportunities in new informal settlements around the capital were also real barriers to successful relocation and new construction of new life. How people actually had lost purpose, had lost income, had really huge health challenges as a result. And so I would commend his article to you for looking at that journey of where livelihoods affects every stage. Another article that struck me was one about planned relocation and how livelihoods planning needs to be absolutely central to planned relocation processes, needs to be participatory, needs to be realistic. And he looks at 2 different communities, not just him and his 2 co-authors look at 2 communities in Odisha in India, and looking at how one in particular, the relocation really failed because people who had fishing livelihoods were brought inland, no access to the sea for different conservation reasons as well as locations. In another case, it was because the land that they had been given was waterlogged and they weren't able to use it. In another case, it was because they didn't have access to the forest land where they used to gather things. And so actually that lack of planning, even though the buildings were perhaps fine where they were going, without those livelihoods, onward migration occurred in nearly every case. It left a huge burden on women. There's a real gender aspect to that livelihoods question in that article. So I would really love to, so that's Arkitesh Panda and Sumanta Banerjee, their article. And one that perhaps brings us to solutions, aside from the planning. And there are a number of articles that look at how migration routes associated with labour can play a part in perhaps positive solutions for people who are forced to migrate. So I commend to you an article by Laura Craft about the specifically around Tuvalu and the agreement with Australia, and looking at the different pathways that have been labour pathways explored there. And a similar idea in Rahul Balasundaram's article around Canada. So what are maybe some of those bigger international frameworks that could shift to provide opportunities for people who are at risk due to climate? So I think that's probably my time finished as well. I looked through the articles this morning to remind myself of where the labour and livelihood aspects were, and it was really hard to choose because there are so many. And you'll probably see other ones as you read them and as you come, many of you, from that more labour and livelihoods perspective. But please do read it. Please do share it as much as possible. It only came out in November. And we're really aware, as you said, Paul, of all these different moments that we could be sharing it with people. And unfortunately, this time it is only in English, but I hope that we will be able to share it in ways that others can access through translation tools. If you'd like to receive Forced Migration Review to your inbox, please do sign up to our mailing list and also follow us on social media. That way you'll also see calls if there are other calls, and we often have climate related themes within other issues. So yes, this one focused on climate, but we might have something more on labour rights where you could come from a climate perspective. So please do engage as authors, as readers, and let's keep this conversation that is so important going in all the ways that we can. I hope that answers your question, Paul, enough. If you had anything else you were hoping for, I'm happy to answer later in the Q&A, or yeah. But thank you very much.
Thank you. And well, thanks again, first of all, for the opportunity. And yeah, I think I fully agree with you about labor as a driver and a solution. I think it's this dimension that is sometimes invisible. It's not really the first one we think about, but when you start digging into it, actually you realize that it's quite fundamental to a lot of what's happening. So I'm just going to change the order because Professor Bishwa Malik has to leave at 3 o'clock, so I'm going to give him the floor next. So he is going to give us the research perspective on intergenerational and household strategies for adaptive livelihoods. So Professor Malik, your work highlights how displaced households rebuild livelihoods through intergenerational strategies in peri-urban Bangladesh. Could you explain what these strategies reveal about resilience that's often missed in individual-focused or short-term interventions, and what lessons should policymakers take from these dynamics when designing labour market and adaptation responses? So please, Professor Malik, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Can you hear me well? I am audible, and can you see my slides also? Okay. Yeah, so my greetings to everyone. So it could be good morning, it could be good afternoon, it could be good evening. So wherever from the world, it's a great pleasure for me to be part of this exceptional event on this International Migration Day, as we want to reflect on this, and also to organizer like Paul and also my co-presenter here, Bia. So just like to start with the topic, we always say that migration is a problem. It could create any problems for after the migrating. But as we have seen here in the picture, you see with two other colleagues, so Shiren Shah and Rup Priyadarshini. So we try to understand from, the intergenerational perspective, how people can also rebuild their livelihood even after the displacement. So what we actually see here, the global challenge for the climate displacement is, if we go from the very general narrative that it's a powerful driver, climate change for the people to want to displace or migration. There are a lot of numbers that we started to the discussions today, how many people has been displaced due to climate change and how many people displaced due to conflict. But climate change is a real matter. Then displacement actually disrupt the livelihoods, right? And force people to go into the precarious situation in the urban areas, like in the slums or even the favelas. And the short-term humanitarian is not so helpful to make the long-term livelihood resilience, right? So that means there is a question what we can see here: how do the displaced peoples or families who actually stay in a precarious situation navigate their livelihood there, and what can the policy or support help us to undermine those challenges and their efforts? So is there any knowledge gap for us? I think there is. That is, we never considered the understanding of people's intergenerational learning processes. Like if we consider the older generations, yes, like those who born before 1970, they have a different experience than the people who born today. So like the older generations provide insights into the past environmental challenge, and they also say how they have coped with this. That means those intergenerational knowledge actually come to the younger generations who can incorporate this new information to balancing the tradition and with the innovation like the mobile technologies, all other things. So this is a process influence to take the decision whether the people will migrate or stay. And that is the crucial understanding. In this paper we try to understand how actually the migrant people rebuild after the disaster or after the migration, and what role different kind of generation actually play in these rebuilding processes. I think that is really important. So here we took the case of Bangladesh. As you know, it's not necessary to explain me that Bangladesh is a very vulnerable country for climate change. If you see the whole map, it is a different kind of disaster is happening there, flood prone zone, cyclone prone zone. But we took a very southwestern part of the Khulna City Corporation, and you see the red mark area here. So there are a lot of small, you can say, standard housing slums. And I considered the people who lives there, they affected by the cyclone in 1991. We called it Gorky cyclone. They also affected by the 2017, 2007 Cedar and 2009. So there are different kind of people who actually came to this area because of Cyclone Gorky or Cyclone Cedar or Cyclone Ayla. And then we try to understand the generational perspective of those families. We interviewed 17 interviews in the families where there is a grandparent, parent, and also the children. And I am going to straightforward to discuss about the results that help them to rebuild their processes. Like in our study, we also consider what was their historical livelihood changes, how it has been changes from the origin and also in the places, what type of strategies they have taken, and then how they can think about the migration or staying as a perception for the future generation. So main findings was that is a reciprocal learning that I mentioned earlier. So there is a elders people give information for the younger one, and then younger one bring that into the new technologies, and that helps the collective household labor, as well as education is a long-term investment for them. So they also invest in the education. Like a 35-year-old poultry farmer, he said that we all play our part. No one could survive alone, right? And then if we go in depth of this reciprocal learning across the generation, you can see here a 38-year-old second generation farmer. He said that my grandfather showed me how to read the tide and weather signs traditionally. I taught him how to use the water pump and check the salinity meter. I learned this from on NGO, Sushilon. So you see, there are a lot of stakeholders involved in this learning process from different generations. And I think that we should consider when we are planning for the future adaptation processes, how this reciprocal learning across generation can play a vital role. Then if we see the collective household efforts, like here, if 45-year-old tea stall owner explained that there is some echo, I think. A 45-year-old tea stall owner explained that we make pickles together. My daughter-in-law's carts, I cook, my granddaughter sells. You see, it's a collective actions within the family, and it helps them to make their life there. So that means when we talk about how families work together, women are vital agencies for the reconstruction of the family. That was our findings. So you always forget that key aspect of the resilience, the gender and women in the family. So we all play our part, but no one could survive without the help of that collective effort or collective household effort in that sense. That means our general tradition in Bangladesh, men is used to go outside for work or migrate, and women run the informal businesses in the locality or the household details, and the elders actually take care of the children and also continuity. So then the bigger portion that we have seen these three generations, that they say youth education is a long-term strategy. If we educate our children, that will help us to survive in future. So they see it as a path out of marginalization because they feel like they're marginalized. But if their children goes to the school, it will make a better chance for their livelihood. So like the quote I mentioned here, 62-year-old grandmother, she said, I cannot read or write, but I send my grandson to school with poultry earnings. Just like selling the eggs or poultries, she sent her grandson to the school. I think that is also a collective effort of resilience making. And then also the very common thread like multi-local households that we said, that people are stay connected across distance. The younger generation, they go for the economic migrants from Dhaka or other places. So like the younger generation migrate for work from Dhaka or Gulf states. They send money to their parents and elder manages those. But at the end of the day, it could bring them the economic and emotional connectedness. Yeah, like it's a kind of interdependency, translocal livelihood, and everything that help them to stay also after the migration. Like the old grandmother also said, my sons work for away, but call every day. I look after the house. This is my duty. So you see the shared responsibility of the family that makes them more resilient. So that's why my proposal is that here it's a community networks across generation plays a vital role, and that we have seen also. You see the a very common tea stall in Bangladesh. All the different kind of younger generation, older generation, they gossip and they share their experiences. They keep their local trust and mutual aid alive always. Yeah, the elders try to do that, and the younger generation, they try to connect with the NGOs, digital information platforms, migrant workers, all these things. And there is actually no tensions between the creating this generational trust and also the communication. That is the key for, I think, building the resilience in their way. And what we can learn from this, resilience is relational. It's not just material. It should be come through the intergenerational processes, and that the informal networks that we have seen are very vital to recovery. With that, we wanted to introduce a new conceptual framework from this binary statement, migrant or stay. We recently published it in the Nature Climate Change. We called it tethered resilience. So all our life making or future making is a part of our life, right? If I am migrating because I want to make my life, if I am staying, I want to make my life. So that means everything related with our future making strategy. And this future making strategy, we mention it here as a concept of beyond the binary aspect of migration or stay. It's a dynamic process of intergenerational learning, an intergenerational process of making the sustainable livelihood, being rootedness at the community with the local knowledge, with the care, as well as with the mobility and also the remittances. So I think if we include this tethered resilience concept into the policy, we can recognize household as an independent system. We can adopt age and gender sensitive approaches into our planning, and we can also support the system like through credit, mutual aid, labor organizations, and invest long-term resilience like housing, health, livelihoods, and also bridge the formal system with the community practices. With that, my key takeaway from this talk and for everyone maybe could be the displaced families are active agents of resilience. We should not treat them that they are vulnerable. I should say that displaced family is also active to make the resilience for them, and the intergenerational collaboration is the central for adaptation and could be this this third angle of understanding the resilience through the beyond the migration and staying. The third resilience should be the guiding policy for the climate should be the guiding policy for climate adaptation. So with that, I wanted to thanks and also thanks to FRM to publish our paper, consider it and I am very grateful to my co-author, as I put also my email address here and their email address. So and thanks for the questions. I am so sorry that I have to run for another meeting to class, but if you have any emergency question now or put you into the chat, I can respond, or you can write me an email. I will be very happy to answer. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Malik. I think that was a really, really insightful presentation, bringing together, I think, a lot of different elements that are really, really important. First of all, that migration doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's often not an individual decision. It's part of a whole household strategy, which, as you say, different members within the household play different roles in different places potentially as well, and one person may move so that others can stay, and there's a lot of sharing that can go on with an important focus on gender angle, also bringing up the care element as well, which is very important. We in ILO see that there's a lot of links between care and climate, and indeed, that resilience is not just a question of physical infrastructure, but it's a social process as well. So I think that is great. If there is anyone who does have a burning question for Professor Malik, I'll just give it a moment in case. Please raise your hand. If not, I will move on. Okay, I'm seeing applause, but no raised hands. So thank you very much, Professor Malik.
Thank you.
Sorry, muted myself. So I'm going to then move on to another of the authors, in this case, a colleague of mine, Bea Cinco. So I'd like to turn to ILO's perspective and approach. Your article argues that access to decent work is a foundational element of a just transition in the context of climate displacement. Could you walk us through what changes when we apply a just transition lens to climate mobility and displacement? And in practical terms, how does this reshape policy choices around employment, skills, social protection, and labour mobility for displaced people and host communities? So, Bea, please go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And thank you for joining us for International Migrants Day. Before I continue, maybe you can just put a thumbs up if you're still there and if you can hear me properly. You know that it's been a long day for some, but really thank you for being with us. As mentioned, my name is Bea Cinco. I am a technical officer at the ILO's Employment Department in Geneva, and I had the privilege of co-authoring one of the articles in the Forced Migration Review's most recent issue, alongside my brilliant colleagues. I'm from the Philippines, and as someone who was displaced a decade ago personally by a super typhoon, this topic is really close to my heart. Now, let me share my screen. I also prepared a small presentation. Yeah, I think you'll be able to see it now. Now, before I talk about what changes when we apply a just transition lens to climate mobility, I want to first explain how we see the role of decent work in climate displacement contexts. So, whether through slower processes like drought or more sudden disasters like floods, people displaced by climate change impacts don't just lose their homes or land, they also lose their jobs, livelihoods, and income. And this was something that we saw anecdotal evidence during Dr. Malik's presentation. But despite this, climate mobility is still too often addressed through short-term humanitarian responses, where the labor market dimension is mostly the missing link. And we see this as a very critical gap at the ILO because we all know personally how work is such a big factor as to how we survive, how we adapt, and how we rebuild in the face of change in general. It doesn't need to be climate change, but of course it's one of those factors. So how we see it is that if we expand access to decent work, we can expand the choices of people affected. So this is the choice to stay and adapt in place if they want to move safely and voluntarily, and the chance to rebuild their livelihoods with dignity. So when you disrupt the access to decent work, what happens? We see very clear consequences. People have reduced resilience to the next climate or economic shock. There's reliance on negative coping mechanisms mechanisms, such as taking on high interest debt or children leaving school to work instead. And some people are trapped in place despite worsening conditions because they do not have the means to move even if they really want to. And so this is why our article argues that access to decent work should not be an afterthought. It should be a foundational element to responses to climate displacement. So now this is where the concept of a just transition becomes relevant. So what do we mean by just transition? I mean, Paul already defined it a bit this earlier in the session, but put simply, a just transition is about making economies more environmentally sustainable, but in a way that is fair, a way that is inclusive, and ensuring that we leave no one behind. And at the core of just transition is, of course, decent work. So if we apply a just transition lens to climate displacement, what are the important shifts that happen? So the article argues that there are two important shifts in how we think about policy responses. So the first is that we move from reactive responses to anticipatory and market-based planning. Climate displacement is not always sudden. It's not always unpredictable because there are contexts like coastal erosion or salinization where the effects are quite gradual and you can foresee the impacts to a certain extent. But what happens when responses are just purely reactive if we wait for a catastrophe to come before we even start thinking about what to do? Examples of what we often see are there's ad hoc trainings that do not really match the labor market demand. And so despite months and years of training, there are no employment outcomes. We do emergency jobs, but after a couple of days, a couple of weeks, there are no other opportunities and the skills are not transferable to other jobs. Or even when we don't plan ahead, we don't respond at all. And if this happens, it pushes people to accept exploitative or precarious work out of desperation. So a just transition lens encourages us to plan with different questions in mind. So some of the questions that we can think of is, how can people who wish to stay where they are keep working? So we see this a lot in indigenous groups where land is sacred to them. And so it's very spiritual to leave a place. So how can we support them to keep working where they are? If they do move, what are their pathways to decent jobs and livelihoods? Can they access jobs in climate resilient or low carbon sectors that support climate adaptation mitigation? Can reskilling or livelihood diversification actually be preemptive? And how can we strengthen the capacity of key institutions, such as public employment services, to absorb the increased demand for jobs? So this first shift really matters as well, because in many contexts, there is a huge uncertainty around the return of people affected by climate change impacts. So for instance, rising seas sometimes can swallow up a whole island. How do you return from that? Sometimes prolonged drought can turn the area of origin permanently non-viable for living or for livelihoods. And so that really raises questions about longer-term labor market integration. The second shift that we have when we apply a just transition lens to climate displacement is that we shift from isolated programs to interventions that actually work at the level of a labor market as a whole. So this benefits both displaced and host communities. So why is this shift crucial? It's because in many of the areas that receive climate displaced populations, often these places already have very saturated labor markets. People work in high levels of informality, and there are deteriorating wages and working conditions. So if we don't apply an integrated approach that respond to the labor market needs before and after displacement, this can lead to competition over jobs and resources, and it can really influence social cohesion. So now that, let's say, a bit of the theory is there, what does a just transition in climate displacement actually look like in practice? So in the article, we look at several practical strategies which can cater for different forms of climate mobility, whether it be short-term movements or longer-term ones. I think Marion put in the chat the link to the article, so you can of course browse a bit more after this webinar. So in context of sudden disasters, so typhoons, for instance, emergency employment creation can provide rapid income support. So we have the example of green public works, such as rebuilding infrastructures or cleanups, which can absorb a lot of people in the green works, and then also restore essential services. So there's a dual purpose behind this. In context of slower onset climate change impacts, so those we can see deteriorating over time, there are longer term measures that are needed, which includes creating more entry-level opportunities in, for instance, waste management or land rehabilitation. I have my colleague here, Lilian, who will be speaking very soon about their work in Kenya, which is really exciting. So I really encourage everyone to stay a bit more. Another example of an approach is upskilling and reskilling for more intermediate and advanced level jobs in green and climate resilient sectors. So we see existing work not only by the ILO, but many NGOs. I know that some of the people who are here with us today are also doing activities of your own. So if you have, maybe you can share also in the group chat. That offer training in green jobs such as renewable energy or solar panel installation. We know that this is happening, for instance, in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Another example is entrepreneurship promotion. It's very important to help affected communities also identify what are the viable and sustainable business opportunities where they are currently hosted. And the article also, of course, highlights the critical role of social protection systems, such as cash transfers, insurance, and social assistance that can provide a safety net and at least some stability. And finally, we also shed light about international labor mobility or labor migration that can support livelihood diversification. But we also argue in the article that labor migration can only contribute to resilience if it is anchored in labor rights. Unfortunately, we have seen a lot of evidence showing that without safeguards, migration really increases vulnerability rather than reduces it. So I think I'll stop here for now so that we can now turn to our last speaker, but very happy to answer questions later on. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Bea, and thanks for that presentation, which I think really got to the heart of some of the really important issues here that, this is displacement in the context of climate change. Like, I think displacement in any context is not only a humanitarian issue. We need to look at it very comprehensively, very holistically. We have these global frameworks, but they need to be adapted to the local context. And so that kind of consultation, that engagement of local communities is absolutely essential to make sure that the response is actually adequate and actually making sense in that context. So yeah, I think that was really, really helpful. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to further discussion. But before that, I will turn to my colleague Lilian Ndinda, who is working in the Prospects program in Kenya, and she can bring us a focus on operationalization and program experience. So the Prospects Partnership in Kenya offers concrete examples of employment-intensive investment programs that are both climate responsive and inclusive of displaced communities. Could you share how these programs work in practice and what makes them effective in supporting livelihoods while also contributing to environmental resilience and coexistence with host communities? It's a tall order, but I'm confident that Lilian will have a lot to tell us. So please go ahead, Lilian. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Allow me to quickly project my screen and just one moment. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul and colleagues. My name is Lilian Ndinda. I'm a national program coordinator with Prospects program in Kenya. based out of Nairobi. I'll do a quick introduction of what Prospects is. It's a partnership for improving prospects or possibilities for host communities and refugees and other forcibly displaced persons. It's a program that's funded by the Government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and ILO is in partnership with 4 other agencies, including UNHCR, UNICEF, the World Bank, and IFC. That's just to give a bit more information on who Prospects is. Currently, Prospects is working in 8 countries across 2 regions in the Arab states and in Africa. In Africa, the program is in Kenya, it's in Uganda, it's in Ethiopia, it's in Sudan and Egypt. For the Middle East, the program is implemented in Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. If you think about these countries, these are countries hosting huge numbers of forcibly displaced persons. And so the program's goal is to explore solutions for including the forcibly displaced persons into the integrating with the host communities in the areas where they live. For just a brief description on the context of forced displacement, I am projecting a photo of the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, and if you look at it, you can clearly see the impact of climate change.
Liliane, we can see we can see the PowerPoint, but it's not in presenter mode. Sorry.
Oh, is it? Okay. Because it's from my end, it's on present mode. Is it better now? Is it better now?
No.
Or should I?
We just see a slide.
Slide number 12, Liliane. Perhaps if you look at the top of the of your screen and you can swap presenter view and in full screen mode, so we can try to see. Otherwise, let me know if you wish. I can also share the slides from my side.
Okay. Is this better now?
It is still the same, I think.
It's still the same. Okay, let me stop sharing and you can share from your end.
Yes, just 1 second.
Sorry to break the flow, but
Sorry for
yes,
that.
apologies. And also apologies from my side for not being able to jump in right away. And thank you all for your patience as we fix this as quickly as possible. Voilà.
Mickey, while we have a small gap, maybe I
Thank
might
you.
just say that we're actually going to be publishing 15 more articles because we had such a huge interest in this topic that we decided to do 15 more in the spring, hopefully March or April. So please do keep a lookout for those. I'll put the link in the chat to joining the mailing list so you'll be alerted when they get published because there's just such a richness. So just had forgotten to say that in my bit. So hopefully that gives you a moment to just sort out
Fantastic.
technicality.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. I see the presentation now.
And you should be seeing the full screen in just a moment. Yes, okay. Good.
Yes.
So I believe you were on the slide with the photo of the Dadaab refugee camp, correct?
Yes, number 3, please. I'm going to share on how we are using the employment intensive investment programming in the forced displacement context. I was projecting the photo on this slide, the Dadaab refugee camp, which is a good example on the context most of the refugee camps across different parts of the world are in. And majority of the displaced persons are living in the low and middle income countries, and often in communities that are under-resourced. So most of the populations are already in contexts that are in distress in terms of infrastructure, in terms of environmental constraints, and also in terms of access to basic services. Most of the camps are also in the rural areas where drought, water scarcity, and low productivity is persistent, as in the case of Dadaab, which I'm projecting right now. And so the employment intensive programming approach, which the ILO has been applying, is providing a link, an entry point to short-term and long-term programming that enables improvement of community infrastructure and also the local environment, targeting both refugees and host communities. I forgot to say that under prospects interventions, we are targeting forcibly displaced persons, but also the host communities with whom they live with. So all interventions across different countries are targeting both populations, again, to promote integration, but also cohesion in the areas where they live in. And so the development approaches and the interventions are also highly informed by priorities by the host country and by the local host governments. This is also in line with the ILO recommendation 205, which many of you might know, on employment and decent work for peace and resilience building, which was passed in 2017, using, again, decent work to support prevention, recovery, and peace and resilience in crisis situations that are arising both as a result of conflicts and natural disasters, but also climate-related causes. Could we go to the next one? So this slide speaks about EIP at work, and these are some of the strategies and key considerations we apply when we are designing and implementing programs in the displacement context. And one is that the programs must result in social and economic inclusion for both refugees and host communities, linking to local area priorities, whether it's the local value chain, access to skills that are relevant for the work that we are targeting. Also, access to local markets, but also restoration of the local environment. The employment intensive approach is mainly for using local available resources to deliver infrastructure and to restore local ecosystems. And so while we're working with refugees and host communities to do this, we are not only building resilience for themselves as people, both host communities and refugees, but also linking them to longer term local area development programs for sustainability. There's also a big component on social cohesion because our programs promote interaction between the refugees and host communities, providing a platform for breaking any existing barriers in terms of interaction, in terms of conflict and reducing the amount of potential conflict arising from the two populations who live side by side. We are also promoting inclusion, and especially in cases where the law restricts movement for refugees in some contexts like Kenya, then when refugees and host communities are working together, whether it's for restoration or for local infrastructure, they get to interact and develop social solidarity through regular interactions and working on similar projects, being in same groups, being in the same cooperatives, and thus again promoting cohesion and inclusion of displaced persons. Our programming is also aiming to bridge the humanitarian and development nexus, linking short-term interventions to longer-term development plans in the refugee hosting areas. Ultimately, it's also promoting social justice and decent work for all. And we work closely with the refugees and host communities, local governments, and local community leadership structures who are quite informed about the different communities living side by side with each other. And we have a strong component on promoting women participation in all the programs that we implement using employment intensive approaches. Next slide, please. So some of the types of employment intensive works that Prospects has implemented in the different contexts include employment intensive manufacturing in sectors like textile and leather, which have a link to the environment and a conservation angle. We are also implementing projects to develop rural infrastructure to improve access to energy and social infrastructure, water and sanitation, and so forth. There are also programs on low-income settlements and access roads and drainage upgrading in different contexts. We also have works around enhancing the agricultural sector, for example, through rehabilitation of water sources like dams, irrigation schemes, biodigesters, water harvesting, and forestry, and also climate adaptation works like prevention of flooding and slope, protection of water sources, afforestation, and waste management, and such interventions that are aimed at promoting environmental conservation while communities still get benefits from it. Next slide, please. I'm showing a photo of an example of one of the water infrastructure that Prospects are supported to rehabilitate in Kenya. And again, using local labor from both refugees and host communities to desilt local water sources. And in this case, this was a dam, resulting to improved water retainers. And in the process, youth are able to access skills for water operations management. They are able to access skills for borehole construction, and also linked to local value chains, which are then strengthened with availability of more water for communities. Next slide. Yeah, we also have another example, and this is also again in Kenya, where we have had interventions on green jobs creation and environmental restoration through management of an invasive species, which covers most of the refugee hosting area, affecting both the refugees and host community. And so we've worked with local communities to manage by manual removal of the plant and replacing the land with indigenous trees or food crops, or even a cash crop of their choice. Again, restoring the local ecosystems and building community resilience while enabling them to earn an income from the restoration process. If you could go to the next slide, I'm almost getting done. This slide shows the process of manual removal of the invasive plant, Prosopis duriflora. And you can see before the manual removal, it's a thicket. That land is not useful for agriculture or livestock rearing. But when communities work together, of course, using protective gear to remove the trees, then they are able to harvest poles for charcoal or for construction of houses at the refugee camp and replace that land with a crop of their choice. In this case, then the community chose pasture for their livestock. Next slide, please. Out of the invasive species, some of the enterprises have come up to value add the wood harvested from the invasive species. And so we have refugee groups making charcoal briquettes out of it, again, providing a green energy source to the refugee camp. We have others who are harvesting and developing beekeeping businesses from the same tree. Others are replacing the land with aloe vera, which is a high value crop in our context, and many afforestation groups. So the point is that we are promoting environmental restoration side by side with social economic inclusion for both refugees and host communities, ensuring that we achieve social cohesion while at it. Thank you, and back to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Liliane, and I think that's really helpful in sort of taking those sort of big high-level concepts and showing how it really works in practice and how it plays out in the context of Kenya and even sort of specific areas of Kenya on providing both the physical infrastructure for adaptation and resilience, but also, as you said, as you're highlighting really the social cohesion aspect as well. So also that social infrastructure, and I think that links back to what Professor Malik was talking about, which is the need for relational resilience as well. So I think it's really, really interesting to see also how we can try as much as possible through these measures to ensure decent work and social justice for all. So this brings us to the end of the speakers that we have. We do have a bit of time left, 10-15 minutes. So if there are any questions from the floor, if anyone would like to ask anything of the presenters who are here, and unfortunately, Professor Malik has had to leave, but the others are here. So please just use the reaction button to raise your hand, and we'd love to be able to facilitate a bit of a discussion. Thank you. I see already one hand. Maybe I'll wait just a moment in case there are any others who also want to come up. Who else want to speak? Okay, second hand. Oh, no, it's gone back down. Okay, well, I'll start then by asking, I see Hrusikesh Harichandan. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm calling from India, and basically I'm a humanitarian worker. I work overseas on livelihood missions and also in different migration setup, including people on move. My point is that, yes, all the three presentations are extremely good and very useful. And my recent mission in Bangladesh and with the population movement operation from Rohingyas, the world's largest camp, what I see when we compare the host community and the people coming from outside the other side of the border, the real challenge remains with the livelihood. But the fact remains, as long as if you see the contrast between the camps where the refugee setup is there and the host community, as long as there are organized programs, meaning there is a funding available to continue those activities, the momentum remains. But it goes down when the funding goes down. So how can we support the homegrown and organic livelihoods so that people can, even if there is a less of funding, people can continue to take up the livelihood activities. Even in the camp setup also, it happens the same. When external funding is reducing, and particularly the people have to live on the basics, then it really creates a problem. And coming to the decent work, the choice of decent work really pivots down there. You cannot expect what you want in such setup. So how do we manage as a development professional? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Really interesting questions. So one on how to ensure the sustainability of activities when funding runs out, and then a second one on, we see decent work as an end goal, but how do we sort of work towards that? For that, I might turn perhaps back to Liliane, I think, who has very concrete experience in this, or also Bea, if you want to maybe have the first go.
Thank you, Paul. Sure, I can give it a try. And while I was presenting, I spoke about anchoring interventions to the host country priorities and to the local area priorities. This is what, for example, the government of Kenya and the actors in the displacement space have agreed to do by having a government-led strategy that directs the local area development, targeting both refugees and host communities. This is providing this framework then helps agencies to program and address the priorities given in the host country priorities strategy. And for Kenya, it's called the Shirika Plan. You could find it online. I'll put it on the chat. But this has been important to coordinate efforts, but also to ensure that the interventions that happen are anchored on longer term programs that will be sustained long after the development partners exit the area. That's what I could say. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Liliane. I think that's a very useful response. I don't know if Bayer, you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, for sure. I also wanted to sort of link it to Liliane's intervention too. In my capacity, I support the Prospects program as well, and across the 8 countries. So one of the, let's say, good practices that we really got to prove with Prospects is how building institutional capacity can really go a long way. So institutional capacity in 2 senses. One is for sure like the public institutions that we have. So for instance, the work that we have with public employment services. So the offices that governments have that help people find jobs or get matched to jobs. Some very concrete interventions that we have is just bringing it closer to where the communities are. So just bringing a bit more physical infrastructure in there so that they don't have to spend 2-3 hours in the commute to go to the city center to be able to even file an application. I think that just giving public institutions the opportunity to be around the communities themselves, I think that in itself has a very concrete impact because they get to see exactly what the lived experience is. I don't know. Of course, like my experience in the Philippines before moving to Geneva, for instance, was that if you're not in Manila, the capital, there are a lot of things that you don't really know how to do, and the people in Manila are also not really very aware of what the specific challenges in the islands, let's say. So making the distance a bit less is one concrete example. And the other capacity in the sense of meaningful participation really of the communities themselves. Refugee-led organizations are very capable. They come up with all of these brilliant ideas by themselves, and developing their capacities to be able to sustain these, and I'm also empowering them to be able to raise funds themselves, for instance. I think it's a very necessary skill especially in this landscape. And when it comes to, let's say, the choice of decent work, this is where the role of social dialogue really plays an important part in participatory assessments, because what my definition of decent work might not be the same as a community's definition of decent work. There are a bit more concrete, more immediate needs sometimes that are really needed in some situations more than others. And until you're able to conversate with the affected communities, then you'll have a better understanding of what a decent job means for them. But I also believe that Rusikesh, in your experience, this is something that you already do, and I can really just encourage that you continue doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Liliane and Tabea for those really interesting responses, really highlighting the need for this. We don't go in and do random interventions, but really anchoring this to priorities based on community participation, based on being close to where the people are, based to long-term planning, the government ownership. I think that's really important, and building that institutional capacity. So thanks very much. I see that we have Babakir Mohammed who would also like to speak. So please go ahead.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, yes.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I am a refugee Sudanese in the Okanda. I want to talk about the intervention of the refugee for livelihood or observe this refugee on the labor. I see the intervention of the organization, if that NGOs or UN, it is not suitable for the refugee. The refugee, they are from different experience. Some of them is doctor, some of them is engineer, some of them is a lawyer. But I see the organization here focus on the intervention of project of agriculture. Most of people, it is not interesting of the agriculture. I see the strategy of the organization must be going to or built according to the interest of the refugee. What refugee going to be interest? What it is going to be weak? I see all the project the project intervention focus on the agriculture that is affected the community of your refugee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this important insight from people with from someone with lived experience. Again, I'm going to hand over to Liliane and Bea because I think again they can share perhaps some of the other examples of some of the work we're doing. Thanks.
Perhaps I can start here, and maybe Liliane, you can complement after me. No, thank you so much, Babikir, for joining us. And I'm really happy that spaces like this, that we also have really the refugee voice. And I am not going to pretend and say that I know exactly what you're going through. We try as much as we can to listen and to design our interventions really based on conversations that we have with refugees. I went to Nakivale, the Nakivale refugee settlement earlier this year in April, and I had the same conversation with young people my age, asking them what kind of jobs do they want, and really we try our best to respond to the dreams and the pathways that they see. And for instance, in my specific project, we work on the digital economy, and we work with refugees who are graphic designers, who are software engineers, who have clients in the US, in London. And when I tell my colleagues in Geneva and outside of Uganda that, look, I met refugee graphic designers servicing US-based clients from a refugee settlement very far away from the capital. They look at me and they say, wait, they have access to the internet, you know. So I think there are really a lot of misconceptions about refugees and what refugees can do. And I think one of the main challenges that we see here is the recognition of prior learning. So as you rightly said, Babakir, that there are a lot of doctors, a lot of teachers, but then because of policy challenges, legal challenges, their degrees are not recognized in their new host country. And that's where sometimes the problem is. And some of the interventions that we have, and I think Lilian can also really speak about the Kenya example, because they recently piloted the recognition of prior learning really, really concretely, is that while we are waiting for some people to be able to regain the right to work as a doctor, for instance, they need this very like shorter term jobs that would allow them to have income while they're studying again, while they're looking for a job. And that's where, let's say, these more manual jobs can also really play a part. So the way that we approach it at the ILO, and the way that we want to encourage other organizations to do it, is that really to see it as a combination of different interventions, some shorter term to really respond to immediate needs, but also with the longer term vision of, okay, this is their entry point to the labor market. How can we help them transition to higher value jobs that they actually, you know, they find dignity in? And it's a process, and it really depends case to case, depending on a person's experience as well, and depending on the situation in the country. But that's the approach that we really try to do. Lilian, I don't know if you want to also complement this with a bit more country specific experience.
Thank you, Bear, and thanks for question. Really, you brought out key issues that are affecting refugees in the refugee hosting countries, and not just Uganda. Actually, many of the refugee hosting countries, we have challenges of access to the local labor markets, and these are legal barriers and skills barriers also, like Bea has described. For us, we work on a couple of priority sectors which are informed by assessments in the refugee hosting areas. I do know that the work in Uganda for the ILO has a strong agricultural component, but it's because that has potential for growth in the refugee hosting area there. In Kenya, we also do have the digital economy work, like Bea described, which enables young people, many people with who have no access to formal labor markets, to be able to offer their services and their creativity online to different parts of the world. We also have a lot of work strengthening refugee-owned and led businesses. We have work in the construction sector and beauty, so different kinds of interventions depending on the context and what has potential for growth. I hear you on the higher professionals. We tend to focus most of our work on the technical and TVET level for skilling, but also access to local labor markets. There are efforts to have better integration at the professional level. I'm just remembering one of the work streams that we are starting next year, that's seeking solutions for the East Africa region, IGAD member states countries, solutions that could enable portability of skills and access to local markets. Early stage, lots of advocacy to do, but still an effort to ensure that the professionals who have moved to countries in the region could have opportunities to utilize their skills to contribute to the countries that they are hosted in, but also to grow their professions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, yeah, you really, again, highlighted the importance of that participatory approach, making sure that we are tailoring to these different skill profiles, these different aspirations. I think the presentation, the mention of the digital economy work is really, I think, quite an innovative approach and really kind of creating these connections between perhaps not the most obvious places, I think is quite eye-opening. Sometimes what we can do. And I do very much appreciate the point on recognition of prior learning and skills. And indeed, actually, as you were talking, this came up in the chat. I saw that Timothy Mudakureva also talked about the importance of recognizing migrant skills and qualifications as being key to participate in economic development and integration into the mainstream economy. So I think that's finding some resonance there. So thank you again, both Liliane and Bea, and also thank you to Babakir for your really the challenge you put to us, but I think a really important point that we need to tailor to people's aspirations and skills, not just what is convenient for us. And that I think is really one of the things at the heart of a rights-based and participatory approach. So I don't see any more hands, and I see we're already 4 minutes over time, and I see that most people have still stayed on. So I'm going to take that as a sign that this was interesting. I hope it was interesting. It certainly was for me. I was taking a lot of notes on the speakers, including, we in our day jobs we don't always get to see what each other is doing. So I'm always excited to talk to colleagues in the field and in different parts of the house to learn what they're doing, and also to have the experiences of professors, experiences of people affected by these real issues in this discussion. So I would just really like to thank you all very much for your participation. I would like to really especially thank our speakers. Unfortunately, Professor Malik isn't here anymore, but please do feel free to reach out to him directly. I believe his contact details are in the chat. I'd like to thank once again Alice for sort of engaging ILO in this process. I think it's been very valuable, and I think we've, again, the level of participation testifies to the interest in this. And Bea and Liliane for sharing their perspectives, and of course to Miki and Marion and the whole team in Turin and ITC ILO for once again putting this together and gathering such a great group of speakers and such a great audience as well. So I would like to really wish you all the very best for the end of the year. Hopefully a happy new year with sort of for you and for your loved ones. And thank you all very much. I don't know if Miki, there's anything else you want to say from your side, but that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I think you've covered all the thank yous that I also wanted to extend on behalf of the International Training Center here in Turin. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to the ILO colleagues, but also to the Forced Migration Review for their participation in the discussion today. I have taken the liberty of posting in the chat box the link to our upcoming courses within the cluster on labor migration at the ITC, because as I mentioned at the beginning, the session today has been organized in the framework of our course on exploring the labor dimensions of climate change and human mobility. A new edition is coming up towards the end of 2026, but at the link you can see the calendar of courses. In most of them are offered in English, but we do have a number of toolkits, self-guided toolkits that you can access for free in different languages, including French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic. So not all of them are available in all the languages, but there is a little bit of something for you in all the different languages if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper in some of the aspects that have been raised today. So thank you all very much for participating in this session, for marking International Migrants Day, commemorating the occasion with us. And I really look forward to seeing you hopefully in future sessions. And I look forward to future collaboration. Thank you all and see you soon.
Thank you all again.
Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you.